Dark spruce forest frowned on either side the frozen waterway. The trees had been stripped by a recent wind of their white covering of frost, and they seemed to lean towards each other, black and ominous in the fading light. A vast silence reigned over the land. The land itself was a desolation, lifeless, without movement, so lone and cold that the spirit of it was not even that of sadness. There was a hint in it of laughter, but of a laughter more terrible than any sadness, a laughter that was mirthless as the smile of the Sphinx, a laughter cold as the frost and partaking of the grimness of infallibility. It was the masterful and incommunicable wisdom of eternity, laughing at the futility of life and the effort of life. It was the wild, the savage, frozen-hearted Northland wild. This was my introduction to Jack London, the opening paragraph of White Fang. I remember, as some of you doubtlessly do, to reading through those lines as a kid, and being just totally immersed in this brutal image that he portrayed of the Yukon as this barren, icy hellscape. Just finishing that and immediately wanting to soak in more. He paints a picture of a frozen world where all life is in a perpetual battle to survive, not just against the elements, but against other life, as he introduces Bill and Henry, two couriers and their dog sled team, mushing a corpse to Fort McGurry, only to realize they're being stalked by a wolf pack. The first few chapters of this book are still some of the best writing I've ever encountered. White Fang is one of London's most famous works. Alongside The Call of the Wild, it tells the story of a wolf dog's life and struggle for survival, and ultimately his domestication by Weedon Scott. Like much of his most famous works, it is set in the Yukon Territory during the Klondike Gold Rush. London spent around a year in the area as a gold prospector from 1897 to 98. If you're from the States, you might remember having to read To Build a Fire in school. Jack London's life, too, reads like one of the stories he used to write. Rough beginnings, daring escapades, ambition matched by hardship, and a legacy far bigger than even he might have imagined. London was far more than an author of dog stories set in the Arctic. He was a laborer, a sailor, an oyster pirate, a wanderer, a political thinker, and one of the first Americans to become both a literary celebrity and a full-time professional writer. As an aside, I also had to look up what an oyster pirate was while I was writing this. It just means someone who poaches oysters. His short life, just 40 years, was packed with adventure, contradictions, and relentless activity. Jack London was someone who lived fully, wrote constantly, and never stopped striving to understand the world and his place in it. Jack London was born John Griffith Cheney on January 12, 1876 in San Francisco, California. His mother, Flora Wellman, was a music teacher and spiritualist, while his biological father, William Cheney, was an astrologer. While still pregnant with Jack, William demanded Flora, quote, destroy her unborn babe, resulting in a failed suicide attempt, which left her still unable to care for her son when he was born. The result was that London was cared for by Virginia Prentice, a former slave who Jack would refer to as his second mother. Virginia would actually loan Jack money to help him buy his first boat. William never would acknowledge his paternity over his son, and in February 1877, Flora married John London, a carpenter and Civil War veteran from whom Jack would get his surname. London's early life was anything but easy. The family was poor, often scraping by on small wages and odd jobs. By the time Jack was a teenager, he was already working long hours, first in a cannery, then as an oyster pirate, and later with the California Fish Patrol, among others, including a newspaper boy and working in a jute mill. These weren't simply odd tales to pull from later in life, all of which were formative experiences. They introduced him to the grit of working-class life, the harsh realities of labor, and the thrill of risk and independence. All of these elements would come to shape his writing and personality. But despite his hard circumstances, Jack had an insatiable intellectual hunger. Flora noted that Jack was reading by age 4, and she taught him how to play the piano. He was largely self-educated, devouring books from the Oakland Public Library. He read everything from Charles Darwin and Friedrich Nietzsche to Karl Marx and Rudyard Kipling. He saw literature not just as escape, but as a way to understand life, and maybe, one day, to rise above his circumstances. Jack's first extended adventure, and also his first big bid with activism, would come in 1893 with Coxey's Army. Jacob Coxey, a quarry owner from Ohio, had attempted to organize a workers' protest in Washington, D.C. against the high unemployment and low wages that were gripping the country. A group from San Francisco under Charles Kelly planned to link up with Coxey. 16-year-old Jack, along with a friend Frank Davis, left home and began hopping trains to link up with Kelly's group, enduring extreme elements, hunger, and avoiding the law until Frank left to go home, and Jack arrived in Hannibal, Missouri, only to find the planned demonstrations low on food. When he couldn't endure the hunger, he left Missouri and continued traveling the country as a hobo until an arrest in Niagara Falls for vagrancy. His imprisonment in the Erie County Penitentiary left a lasting mark on his life, and he recounted the entire ordeal in his 1907 autobiography, The Road. Jack ultimately would return home to San Francisco and to work for a few years, but at 21, another event would catalyze a great change in the young man's life. Buck did not read the newspapers, or he would have known that trouble was brewing, not alone for himself, but for every Tidewater dog strong of muscle and with warm, long hair, from Puget Sound to San Diego. Because men groping in the Arctic darkness had found a yellow metal, and because steamship and transportation companies were booming the find, thousands of men were rushing into the Northland. These men wanted dogs, and the dogs they wanted were heavy dogs, with strong muscles by which to toil, and furry coats to protect them from the frost. From the call of the wild, the Klondike Gold Rush was one of the most dramatic and chaotic events of the late 19th century. It began in 1896 when gold was discovered in Bonanza Creek, a tributary of the Klondike River, in the remote Yukon Territory of northwestern Canada. News of the discovery reached the wider world in 1897, triggering a stampede of over 100,000 prospectors, mostly from the United States, hoping to strike it rich. Getting to the Klondike was a grueling challenge. Most stampeders traveled by ship to the Alaskan ports of Skagway or Dyea, then hauled their supplies over the treacherous Chilkoot or White Pass trails. From there, they built or bought boats to navigate the Yukon River to Dawson City, the heart of the gold fields. The journey could take months and was fraught with dangers, including avalanches, extreme cold, and disease. While only a small percentage of miners actually found gold, the rush had a significant impact. Dawson City grew rapidly into a booming frontier town, and the Yukon became more accessible and economically developed. For many, however, the dream of instant wealth ended in hardship and disappointment. The Klondike Gold Rush became an enduring symbol of adventure, grit, and the American and Canadian dream of fortune through hard work and risk. In July 1897, at the age of 21, London joined thousands of fortune seekers heading to the Klondike region in northwestern Canada after gold was discovered near Dawson City. He traveled with his brother-in-law and a small group of men, sailing from San Francisco to Skagway, Alaska. From there, they faced the treacherous climb up the Chilkoot Pass, an icy mountainous route that tested even the strongest travelers. Like many stampeders, London had to haul a year's worth of supplies over the pass in repeated trips, often in freezing conditions. The journey itself was brutal, but life in the Klondike was even tougher. London and his companions built a cabin on the banks of the Yukon River, near a small settlement called Henderson Creek. Conditions were bleak. The weather was punishing, with temperatures often dropping below -50 degrees Fahrenheit. Food was scarce, and scurvy was a constant threat due to a lack of fresh fruits and vegetables. London, like many others, suffered from the disease. His gums swelled, his joints ached, and he was eventually forced to leave the Yukon earlier than planned to recover. But even though he was physically broken, London came back with gold of another kind, stories. He had observed firsthand the desperation, cruelty, resilience, and camaraderie of those who chased fortune in one of the most unforgiving places on earth. He saw how men and women were shaped and often destroyed by the wild. He witnessed the struggle between nature and civilization, instinct and reason, suffering and perseverance. These experiences became the foundation for some of his best-known writing. In The Call of the Wild, 1903, he tells the story of Buck, a domesticated dog who is thrust into the Yukon wilderness and slowly reverts to his primal roots. In To Build a Fire, London explores a man's fatal underestimation of the Arctic's deadly cold. The detailed realism, the harsh tone, and the elemental struggle found in these works came directly from London's lived experience. Though London never found gold, the Klondike gave him something more valuable: a voice, a purpose, and the material that would make him one of America's most enduring literary figures. London's first-hand experiences in the frozen North gave his writing authenticity. His breakthrough story, To Build a Fire, and his first big novel, The Call of the Wild, drew directly from this time. His vivid descriptions of sled dogs, howling wilderness, and the savage beauty of nature captivated readers. He captured something primal, the struggle between civilization and savagery, between man and the wild, that resonated with people then and still does today. Singers in Werconomy. The Call of the Wild was an instant success. London had found his voice and his audience. Martin Eden was perhaps his most personal novel. It tells the story of a working-class sailor who becomes a famous writer only to find that success feels hollow and isolating. It mirrored London's own life in many ways, especially his disillusionment with the literary elite and the capitalist world that rewarded his talent while ignoring the causes he believed in. Over the course of his career, London wrote more than 50 books and hundreds of short stories and essays. He was one of the most prolific writers of his era and one of the highest paid too. He was a working-class kid who had managed to make it big, doing something most people saw as impossible: living off his pen. One of the lesser-known but crucial sides of Jack London was his political life. He wasn't just a passive observer of inequality, he was an outspoken socialist. Influenced by his own poverty and readings of Marx and Engels, he saw capitalism as a deeply unjust system that exploited workers and created suffering. London joined the Socialist Labor Party in 1896 and later the Socialist Party of America. He ran for mayor of Oakland twice on the socialist ticket, though he didn't win. His political writings, essays like The Scab and How I Became a Socialist, and books like The Iron Heel, 1908, revealed a radical, at times almost prophetic thinker. The Iron Heel envisioned a future where corporate oligarchs seize control of the U.S. government, an early example of dystopian fiction long before Orwell or Huxley came on the scene. He was also part of a literary group in San Francisco called The Crown, which advocated for workers' rights and animal welfare, among other causes. Yet London's politics were complicated. While he championed the poor and working class, he also embraced ideas rooted in social Darwinism, and at times expressed views that were racist or imperialist by today's standards. This contradiction remains a difficult part of his legacy. In 1904, Jack London traveled to East Asia as a war correspondent to cover the Russo-Japanese War for the San Francisco Examiner and the Hearst newspaper chain. It was a major conflict between Imperial Russia and Imperial Japan over control of Manchuria and Korea, and it gave London a front-row seat to a modern war that was being closely watched around the world. London arrived in Korea and attempted to accompany the Japanese army as it advanced into Russian-held territory. However, his experience was marked more by frustration than frontline reporting. The Japanese military, highly secretive and suspicious of foreign journalists, strictly limited access to the battlefield. London chafed under the censorship and restrictions, which prevented him from seeing the action up close or sending back timely, uncensored reports. Despite the limitations, London managed to file a series of vivid dispatches, focusing not just on military maneuvers, but on the culture, people, and conditions he encountered. He often emphasized the discipline and resolve of Japanese soldiers, though his descriptions sometimes reflected the racial and cultural biases of his time. London's stint as a war correspondent ended abruptly after he got into trouble with Japanese authorities, first for taking unauthorized photographs, and later for allegedly disobeying orders. He was briefly detained and eventually expelled from the front. Jack London was married twice. His first marriage to Bess Mattern produced 2 daughters but didn't last. By all accounts, the marriage was more about practicality than romance. His second marriage to Charmian Kittredge was more of a love match. Charmian was not just his wife, but also his editor, manager, and travel companion. She shared his adventurous spirit, and together they journeyed across the Pacific, through Asia, and to the South Seas aboard their custom-built yacht, the Snark. Unfortunately, the Snark voyage was plagued by illness and logistical issues. London suffered serious health problems, likely made worse by alcohol and exhaustion. Still, he continued writing, even while bedridden or in pain. His ambition never slowed, even when his body began to break down. Back home in California, London poured time and money into his beauty ranch in Glen Ellen. He dreamed of creating a model of sustainable agriculture, but the project struggled. Poor planning and bad luck led to repeated failures, but London stuck with it. It was his escape from the stresses of public life. By his mid-30s, London's health had deteriorated significantly. He had suffered from tropical diseases during his travels, struggled with kidney issues, and was likely addicted to morphine, which he used to manage chronic pain. His drinking didn't help either. On November 22, 1916, Jack London died at the age of 40 at his ranch in Glen Ellen. The official cause was uremia, kidney failure, though rumors of suicide have surrounded his death for over a century. Whether accidental or intentional, his early death stunned fans and critics alike. He had packed more living and writing into 4 decades than most people manage in twice that time. Success today, Jack London's legacy endures. The Call of the Wild and White Fang remain classics, widely read in schools and adapted into films. But beyond the literature, London stands out because he lived the kind of life most authors only imagined. When he wrote about hunger, struggle, and survival, it wasn't make-believe, it was memory. He was one of the first American authors to achieve international fame and financial independence through writing. He was also a rare figure in that he bridged the worlds of popular fiction and serious political thought. He wrote for mass-market magazines, yes, but he also wrote with a purpose, questioning the values of his society, imagining alternatives, and chronicling the human condition in raw, sometimes brutal terms. I hope this serves as a good introduction to the life of Jack London. This is really meant to be a companion to the readings of some of his work that I'll be putting up soon, so check the description for those here shortly. Thank you.